Now, survival rates for many cancers have increased dramatically over the last few years, but for some types of cancer, survival rates have remained frustratingly low. The combined 5-year survivability for people who are diagnosed with brain, liver, lung, esophageal, pancreatic and stomach cancers, for example, is just 14%. Well, now campaigners are calling on the government to do something about this. They want them to adopt new survival targets to help tackle this problem. I'm joined now to talk about this by Jewell, chair of the Less Survivable Cancers Taskforce, and Steve Metcalfe, who is living with cancer of the esophagus. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Anna, that is a really depressing statistic, just 14%. What can the government do about it?
We feel there's a lot they can do about it. We know that these cancers have really suffered a legacy of neglect in terms of prioritisation and funding, and particularly we want to see more research funding come into these cancers. They receive 5 times less research funding than the more survivable cancers.
Why is that?
I think it has been seen that these cancers are quite difficult to diagnose, difficult to treat.
Therefore more expensive.
Yeah, sometimes more expensive, but also I think there's just been prioritisation about trying to tackle some of the other cancers where perhaps we can see we can make more progress, which has been great, and it's fantastic to see that improve survival, but we now feel that we need to be set on that same path to increasing survival.
Well, Steve is sitting here as a shining example of surviving, because Steve, you were diagnosed back in 2012.
Yep.
You're sitting here and you describe it as living with cancer.
Living with cancer, obviously to be diagnosed with a terminal illness is devastating for you and the family. And these particular cancers are very low survival because they're detected very late, typically. And because of that, also the 5-year survival rate is less than 14%. So I'm a lucky one. There should be more like me, and I think if the targets of the Least Survivable Cancer Taskforce can be met, then I think the plan is to double the potential survival rate in 10 years.
And what kind of treatment have you had on the NHS? Have you had any treatment? What kind of...
Oh yeah. There was 6 months of chemotherapy, which was pretty tough, very tough, and then some radiotherapy. And then basically after that, I've been very lucky in that I've been very fortunate to be one of the, in the very small percentage that can survive.
Because Anna, not everyone's as lucky as Steve when they get something like cancer of the esophagus, or we were mentioning their pancreatic, stomach cancers.
No, unfortunately not. I mean, unfortunately, the 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer remains stubbornly low at just 7%, and this really has barely changed in over 40 years, whereas for the more survivable cancers, we've seen almost a doubling and tripling in some survival rates. If you look at breast or prostate cancer, they're up to 85%. So we feel that the survival remains unacceptably low for these low surviving cancers, and we really need some action now, some emphasis, so that we no longer are left lagging behind, and so that we can start to catch up and emulate that path that's been taken.
Well, as Steve said, early diagnosis is key in this, and when you look at the government trying to get these survival rates up, people automatically think about money, but it probably doesn't have to be about money. It could be about raising awareness of symptoms, because, you know, when it comes to pancreatic cancer, stomach cancer, cancer of the esophagus, are people aware of the symptoms enough? Is that why it's diagnosed so late?
I know, unfortunately, you know, some of the symptoms can be quite vague, quite confusing. We do think there's more a need for greater awareness of the symptoms of these cancers, so there can be sort of abdominal symptoms that are quite vague, but it's about people realising what symptoms there might be and knowing what's normal for them, and knowing to come forward. And the other unfortunate thing is sometimes we hear about people actually going back to their GP many times before they're diagnosed. So if these cancers were picked up better, and there are tools that are being introduced by charities, by governments, that could help detect these cancers better and earlier, and we just think there needs to be more emphasis on getting those introduced nationwide so that we can pick up these cancers earlier and get them into treatment quicker. Yeah,
and Steve, as I said, you're a shining example of someone who can live with cancer and, you know, go beyond those survival rates, because you're not just living with cancer, you're going beyond, you're, you know, exercising, you're living your life.
Yes.
Like everyone else.
Yeah, and I think also with cancer, you've got to remember it's not just the person that's affected, it's the whole family and the infrastructure around that. And as I say, I've been one of the very lucky few, and hopefully with this initiative there can be more research as well involved in looking into these cancers, because I think that's an area where there's not as much funding into the least survivable cancers, whereas the more common cancers get more of the headline money.
OK, well, Steve and Anna, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us. They're calling on the government to adopt a new target to double the number of people who survive with these kind of cancers for at least 5 years to 28% by 2029. Thank you both for coming in.